No drama, my father whispered on my first night home in 3 years. 10 minutes later, my stepmother's palm met my face in the hallway, the air thick with her cheap perfume and the metallic tang of blood. She thought I was the same quiet girl she remembered, but this time, I'd brought the office with me. Every number, every email, every secret, tomorrow, at North Alder Ventures. Her slap wouldn't just be an assault, it would be an agenda item. My name is Rowan Hale. For the last 3 years, home has been a sterile high-rise in West Barrow, a city that measures life in stock tickers and server uptime. My role as the head of risk management for North Alder Ventures is to quantify disaster, to model chaos into predictable, manageable data points. I trade in probabilities, not emotions. But tonight, I was driving back into the one variable I could never properly model: family. The town of Greywater, in the perpetually damp state of Ashmore, greeted me with a familiar sigh of rain against the windshield. The wipers beat a hypnotic, mournful rhythm. Each swipe revealed streets I knew too well, lined with houses whose secrets I had outgrown but never forgotten. This wasn't a homecoming. It was a site visit, an audit of a festering liability. Number 17 Lantern Lane appeared at the end of the cul-de-sac, its windows glowing with a warm, deceptive light, like a predator's lure. The house where I grew up, where my mother's memory was now just a ghost in the floorboards, paved over with new hardwood and the scent of another woman's life. I'd paid the taxi driver to wait at the curb for 15 minutes, no matter what. Enough time to pick up a forgotten heirloom, I'd said, my voice smooth and practiced. In reality, it was enough time to walk in, plant the seed of their destruction, and walk out. The heirloom I was collecting wasn't silver or porcelain, it was digital. My father, Daniel, opened the door before I could ring the bell. His face, once a map of strength and certainty, was now a landscape of soft compromises and nervous edits. The lines around his eyes were deeper, etched not by laughter but by a constant, low-grade anxiety. He pulled me into a brief, stiff hug that smelled of cedar and fear. "Rowan," he murmured into my hair, his voice a low current of warning. "No drama, please. She's been looking forward to this." The lie was so thin it was transparent. I stepped back, letting my gaze sweep over him. He wouldn't meet it. He was already practicing his retreat. "No drama," I echoed, my tone flat. It wasn't a promise. It was an observation of his terms. And there she was. Celeste, my stepmother, standing at the end of the hall like a final boss in a video game I never asked to play. She held a glass of white wine, the pale liquid catching the light from the new, ostentatious chandelier. She was dressed in a cream-colored cashmere dress that probably cost more than my first car. Everything about her was curated to project effortless wealth and serene control, an image, like everything else in this house, that was a carefully constructed fiction. "Rowan, darling," she said, her voice a silken weapon. "You look, well, city life agrees with you." She glided forward, the wine swirling in her glass. She didn't offer to take my coat. She didn't offer a hug. Her presence was a declaration of territory. "Celeste," I acknowledged, keeping my hands visible, relaxed at my sides. My father hovered by the door, a nervous ghost at his own haunting. "Can I get you something to drink? Rowan? Water? Wine?" "I'm not staying, Dad," I said, my eyes still locked on Celeste. This was the critical moment. The variables were all in place. Celeste's smile tightened by a millimeter. It was the only tell. The pristine control faltered. "Not staying? But Daniel said you were coming for dinner. I made the risotto you used to love." Another lie. I hated risotto. My mother had loved it. The appropriation of my mother's memory was a classic Celeste move, a subtle act of erasure. "I have an early start tomorrow," I said simply. "I just came to pick something up." The air in the hallway grew thick, heavy with unspoken history. This was the chessboard, and she had just realized I wasn't playing the part of a pawn. Her eyes, the color of cold jade, narrowed. She took a final, deliberate sip of her wine, and then she moved. It was fast, faster than I'd anticipated. One moment she was the picture of suburban grace. The next, her arm was a blur. The slap was a crack of sound in the quiet hall, a sharp, concussive impact that sent a jolt of white-hot pain from my cheekbone to my jaw. My head snapped to the side from the force. For a split second, the world was just the ringing in my ear and the starburst of light behind my eyes. The wine glass, forgotten in her rage, slipped from her other hand. It didn't just drop. She flung it in the aftershock of her motion. It shattered on the floor, a crystalline explosion. Shards of glass skittered across the polished wood, coming to rest around the base of a silver-framed photograph on the console table. Their wedding picture. Daniel and Celeste, smiling, frozen in a moment of manufactured joy, now surrounded by the debris of her violence. I tasted blood, a coppery tang on my tongue. The scent of her cloying floral perfume mingled with the sharp, acidic smell of spilled Sauvignon Blanc. It was a nauseating cocktail. My training, my entire professional ethos, took over. Do not react. Do not escalate. Observe. Document. My body went still, absorbing the shock, converting the pain into cold, hard data. My father made a choked sound, a half-formed protest that died in his throat. Celeste's chest was rising and falling rapidly. A faint flush of color stained her high cheekbones. She hadn't expected her own loss of control, but now, seeing my lack of response, her fury regrouped, solidifying into a cruel satisfaction. Slowly, deliberately, I turned my head, not back towards her, not towards my silent, useless father. I turned it towards the ornate, gold-leafed mirror hanging on the opposite wall. My reflection stared back, one cheek already turning a mottled red, a thin trickle of blood starting from my nose. But my eyes were focused on something else reflected in the glass, a small, black coat hook, slightly incongruous with the rest of the gilt decor, the one I had screwed into the wall myself just 5 minutes ago, while my father was paying the taxi and Celeste was waiting in ambush. The lens was no bigger than a pinprick. "In this house," Celeste hissed, her voice low and venomous, the silken sheath stripped away to reveal the blade beneath. "I am Mrs. Hale. You are redundant." Redundant, a corporate term, an asset no longer required, a position to be eliminated. She thought she was delivering a final, crushing verdict. She had no idea she was simply confirming the premise of my entire case file. I saw my father in the mirror's reflection. He had his hands shoved deep into his trouser pockets, a futile attempt to hide their trembling. His gaze was fixed on the shattered glass on the floor, on the pristine image of his new life, now irrevocably fractured. He said nothing. His silence was his signature on her affidavit. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. I met my own eyes in the mirror, then flicked my gaze back to Celeste's triumphant face. "Noted," I said. My voice was steady, quiet. It was the word I used in meetings when a junior analyst presented a risk I had already identified and modeled weeks ago. As if on cue, a subtle vibration buzzed against the skin of my wrist. I didn't need to look at my watch. I knew the message protocol. The coat hook camera was Wi-Fi enabled. Its feed routed through a microserver in my bag and uploaded directly to a secure encrypted cloud server. The haptic feedback was the confirmation. The alert would read, "File synced, hallway 0003, UV." 3 seconds of footage, the sound of her voice, the crack of the slap, the shatter of the glass, the exact duration of the event, time-stamped and secured, evidence. I raised a hand to my face, my fingers coming away slick with blood. The sting was beginning to recede, replaced by an icy, clarifying calm. This slap, it wasn't the first time she had used her hands to enforce her dominion. I was sure of it. I'd seen the faint, yellowing bruises on my father's wrist last Christmas, dismissed by him as a bump against a filing cabinet. The emotional violence had been her primary tool for years, but this physical escalation was a gift. It was a tangible, recordable, undeniable act. It would be the last. Without another word, I turned and walked back towards the front door. My shoes, damp from the rain, left a perfect, wet footprint on the pristine hardwood floor, a dark stain on their perfect home. It felt right, a small patch of mold, the beginning of a rot that would spread through the foundations and bring the whole rotten structure down. My father finally moved, taking a hesitant step towards me. "Rowan, wait." I didn't stop. I pulled the heavy door open, letting in a gust of cold, wet air that swirled the smell of rain and reality into their perfumed, suffocating world. "The taxi is waiting, Dad," I said, not looking back. "I have to go. No drama." I closed the door behind me, the solid click of the lock echoing the closing of a file. The first piece of evidence was secured. The case was officially open. The drive back to West Barrow was a 4-hour corridor of hypnotic highway lights and simmering, methodical rage. The throbbing in my cheek was a steady metronome, counting down the minutes until I was back in my own territory, back in the world of clean data and verifiable facts. By the time I walked into my apartment, the sun was a pale rumor on the horizon. I didn't sleep. I iced my face, the cold seeping into the bruised tissue, and opened my laptop. The file was waiting in its secure cloud directory. Hallway 0003 V. Exhibit A. But the crime it documented was so much bigger than a simple assault. The slap wasn't the beginning of the story. It was merely the press of the enter key, the command that executed a program I had been writing for months. My professional life is housed on the 34th floor of the obsidian glass tower that is the headquarters of North Alder Ventures. From the outside, NAV is the very picture of 21st century corporate righteousness. We are an investment fund with a conscience, specializing in the acquisition and growth of green technology firms. Our portfolio is a catalog of eco-friendly buzzwords: sustainable agriculture, carbon capture, renewable energy. Our annual reports are printed on recycled paper, featuring smiling people against backdrops of solar panels and lush forests. We don't just invest, we make an impact. It's a beautiful, clean, profitable lie. For the past 2 years, the architect of this beautiful lie has been our CEO, Victor Lyle. Victor is handsome in the way of a man who knows his photograph will be in magazines. He has perfect teeth, a voice modulated for keynote speeches, and the easy charisma of someone who has never been told no. He arrived like a messiah, promising to double our valuation while saving the planet. He talked about ethics and transparency more than anyone I'd ever met, and one of his first, most celebrated acts of transparency was to appoint an unpaid corporate ethics advisor to oversee our philanthropic endeavors. His choice for this esteemed position was, of course, Celeste Hale. My father, the company's long-serving and soon-to-be retiring chief operating officer, had married her less than a year after my mother's funeral. It was a whirlwind of calculated sympathy and strategic consolidation. He was a man hollowed out by grief, and she was a predator who saw a vacuum of power. The wedding was a quiet, tasteful affair that felt more like a leveraged buyout of my father's life than a marriage. Suddenly, this woman who had been a peripheral figure in our town's social scene was installed in my mother's house and, shortly after Victor's arrival, in the periphery of my company's org chart, a non-employee with an office, a title, and an unnerving amount of influence. My job is to see the cracks in the foundation before they become earthquakes. 6 months ago, I saw the first hairline fracture, a line item in the quarterly expense report under Community and Social Outreach. The number was trivial at first, but it grew, quarter over quarter. The allocation to this budget line swelled, quietly, steadily, like a tumor. It was an anomaly, a deviation from the pattern. My inquiries were met with benign smiles. It was for charity. I was told, good PR, all part of the NAV mission. But the numbers didn't feel right. They were round, clean figures. Unlike the usual messy, specific invoices of real-world expenses, they were placeholders. I started digging on my own time, after hours, using a sandbox terminal that left no trace on the company network. The money, millions of dollars, was being funneled into a single nonprofit organization, the Cedar Outreach Foundation. I pulled up their website. It was a masterpiece of corporate synergy, stock photos of smiling, diverse children, vague mission statements about empowering underserved communities and fostering sustainable futures. The founder and chairwoman, pictured on the Our Team page with a serene, benevolent smile, was Celeste, the signatory on every single wire transfer from NAV to Cedar Outreach. The one who approved my father's COO budget allocation was Victor Lyle. Their tax filings were immaculate, a glossy portfolio of claim deductions and community grants that seemed to vanish into thin air, with no verifiable recipients. I remember a board meeting 3 months ago. We were reviewing the quarterly risk assessment. I had flagged the outreach budget as having insufficient documentation for its expenditure level. I recommended a full audit of the recipient foundation. The room went quiet. Victor Lyle leaned forward, his benevolent CEO mask firmly in place. He gave the table a paternal, indulgent smile. "Rowan," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "Always so diligent, but we can't let our numbers girl get lost in the weeds. Cedar Outreach is a passion project. It's about heart, not just spreadsheets." He turned to the rest of the board. "Let's not hamstring our charitable work with bureaucratic red tape, shall we?" He dismissed me, in front of everyone. He reduced my role, my expertise, my very identity at that company, to the numbers girl. I said nothing. I just made a note on my tablet, a private annotation on the meeting minutes only I would ever see. It read, "Numbers don't forget." That was the moment I knew I was right. 2 weeks later, my suspicion was confirmed. Our longtime external auditors, a notoriously meticulous firm of old-school accountants, were abruptly replaced. The reason given was a strategic realignment to a more forward-thinking partner. Their replacement was a slick, modern firm known for its creativity. When I requested the full digital audit trail from the transition period, I found entire sections of the server logs had been cleanly excised. The timestamps were broken. It was a digital cover-up, elegant and brazen. They weren't just hiding the crime, they were erasing the fact that a crime had ever taken place. That night, I began building my weapon. The company's general ledger was a living document, a vast and complex ecosystem of data, but it was their ecosystem, on their servers. I needed my own copy, a perfect, untouchable mirror. Over the course of a week, working in the dead of night through encrypted back channels, I cloned it, every transaction, every line item, every deleted entry and revised forecast, downloaded to a solid-state drive that never touched the NAV network. I built a hidden parallel ledger, a ghost version of their books that told the true story. For the final layer of security, I encrypted the entire drive. The password had to be something I would never forget, and something no one else could ever guess. I chose a line from a poem my mother used to read to me when I was a child. A silly verse about a ship sailing on a sea of stars, a fragment of a memory, a piece of my own authentic past, used to lock away the evidence of their fraudulent present, my mother's ghost, protecting the truth. It's strange how patterns repeat. At home, Celeste redecorated my mother's life. She replaced the worn, comfortable furniture with sterile, modern pieces. She took down family photos and put up abstract art. She filled the silence my mother left with cocktail parties and the clinking of glasses. In the corporate world, she performed the same function. She was a piece of decoration, a human shield of ethics used to beautify an ugly truth. At 17 Lantern Lane, she decorated the living room with my father's old sailing trophies and fresh flowers. On the 34th floor of the NAV Tower, she decorated fraudulent documents with her flowing, authoritative signature. Standing in my silent apartment, the city lights of West Barrow painting sterile patterns on the wall, I finally understood. The bruise on my face was not a domestic issue, it was a business expense. I had become a risk, and Celeste had moved to mitigate me in the only way she knew how. She didn't slap her problematic stepdaughter. She slapped the head of risk management who was about to unravel a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The violence in the hallway was a warning, a crude and desperate attempt to reassert control, to put the numbers girl back in her place. She thought the slap was the end of a conversation, a full stop. She had no idea it was the data point I needed to complete my model. It was the nexus, the event that fused the personal and the professional into a single, actionable case. It gave motive a face. It gave conspiracy a physical form. The cold, abstract numbers in my secret ledger now had the heat of my own blood on them, and I was ready to make my report. Data is clean, numbers are pure, but a corporate fraud case, like any good story, needs more than just a spreadsheet. It needs characters. It needs setting. It needs physical evidence. A video of a slap is a powerful opening scene, but it's not enough to bring down an entire C-suite. To build an unshakable case, I needed to populate their world with witnesses they would never see. I needed ghosts. My first ghost worked the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift on the executive floor. Her name was Maribel. She was in her late 50s, with kind, tired eyes and hands that were chapped from years of wrestling with industrial cleaning chemicals. Most executives looked right through her, a functional part of the building's infrastructure, no more notable than a thermostat or a light switch. I made a point of learning her name. I asked about her daughter, a student at the city college. I brought her a coffee sometimes, the expensive kind from the cafe downstairs, and we'd talk for a few minutes in the echoing, empty corridor after everyone else had gone home. I wasn't just being kind. I was investing. I was cultivating an asset. The investment paid off a month before the incident in the hallway. I was working late, reviewing the latest doctored report from our new auditors, when Maribel knocked softly on my open office door. She held out a crumpled manila envelope in her gloved hand. "Miss Hale," she said, her voice a respectful whisper, "I found this near the shredder bin in Mr. Lyle's office. It must have fallen from the trash." I took it. The envelope was empty, but on the front, written in Celeste's looping, ostentatious script, were 2 words and a number. Cedar, tranche 3. Tranche, a financial term, a portion of a larger whole. This wasn't a donation. This was a payment. This was a piece of the puzzle. "Thank you, Maribel," I said, my voice even. "You have good eyes. This might be important." I slid a crisp $100 bill from my wallet and held it out. She tried to refuse, but I insisted. "For your daughter's textbooks," I said. It wasn't a bribe. It was a retainer. From that moment on, Maribel's eyes became my eyes after the sun went down. My second ghost was a barista. Across the street from the Nav Tower was a perpetually busy coffee shop called The Daily Grind, which offered free, unsecured guest Wi-Fi. Every morning, I saw dozens of Nav employees, from interns to VPs, grabbing their morning latte and logging on with their work laptops to get a head start on their emails. It was a staggering security flaw, but one that served my purpose. The barista who worked the morning rush was a young man named Knox. He had a cascade of dark curls, a perpetually bored expression, and a laptop sticker for a defunct cybersecurity conference. One rainy Tuesday, I ordered my usual black coffee and struck up a conversation. He was, as I suspected, a dropout from West Barrow University's network security program. "Tuition's a killer," he'd said with a shrug, wiping down the espresso machine. "I might have some freelance work for you," I said, keeping my voice low. "Strictly confidential. It involves data recovery." His bored expression sharpened with interest. We met that evening. I laid out the terms. I would pay off the remainder of his student loan debt. In exchange, he would sit in his cafe for 2 hours every morning and run a packet sniffer, capturing the unencrypted data flowing from the Nav laptops on his network. I wasn't interested in corporate espionage on a grand scale. I wanted one thing and one thing only: cached emails and server logs connected to Victor Lyle and Celeste Hale. It was a digital wiretap, and Knox had the skills to do it without leaving a single footprint. He agreed without hesitation. My third ghost smelled of stale cigarette smoke and the leather of a town car's interior. Gabe was one of the company's night drivers, a taciturn man in his 60s who had been with the firm for 20 years. He was quiet, observant, and like Maribel, entirely invisible to the people he chauffeured. His usual shift ended at 8 p.m., but I knew Victor Lyle often stayed late, especially on nights when Celeste was in the city. I approached Gabe in the underground parking garage, a concrete cavern that muffled sound. I explained that I needed a sensitive project monitored. I needed someone I could trust. I offered him a bonus, a significant one, to trade his shift for the late-night one for 2 weeks. His only job was to keep a detailed log of Victor Lyle's movements after 9 p.m. and, if possible, to take photographs. No questions asked. The money I offered was more than his salary for 6 months. It was enough to make him forget his questions. He took the deal. With my network in place, the data began to flow. The pieces of their secret world started arriving in encrypted drops. Maribel would leave notes for me, tucked inside a hollowed-out cleaning spray bottle she left in the 14th floor supply closet. Mrs. Hale arrived 9:15 p.m., went to Mr. Lyle's office, carried a paper bag from La Maison Patisserie. This happened 3 times in the first week. A late-night social call with expensive pastries seemed innocent enough, but the frequency was a pattern. It was a ritual. Then, a file appeared from Knox in my secure inbox. The subject line was simply, bingo. It was a fragmented email, recovered from a cached data packet. The sender was Celeste. The recipient was Victor. The subject, draft for charity, gala speech. The body of the email was mostly Adine marketing speak about impact and community, but at the very bottom, in what was clearly a reply to a previous message from Victor, was a single, chilling sentence. The language is fine, but we need to accelerate the timeline for scrubbing the books on the last transfer. Let's finalize the round-trip details tonight. Round trip. The term sent a jolt of ice through my veins. It was a classic money laundering scheme. Money leaves the company as a legitimate donation, goes to the charity, and then a portion of it trips back to the executives through inflated invoices, consulting fees, or other phantom services. It was elegant, brazen, and almost impossible to trace without an inside source. The final piece of the operational puzzle came from Gabe. At 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday night, my phone buzzed with a message. It was a single, grainy photo. Victor Lyle, his face illuminated by the harsh glow of a single bulb over a service entrance, was exiting the back door of a small, nondescript office building downtown. The address Gabe provided was the registered headquarters of the Cedar Outreach Foundation. He was carrying a small, hard-sided briefcase. The timestamp on the photo was 10:42 p.m. He wasn't just approving payments, he was making pickups. Now I had the numbers, the digital trail, and the physical movements, but I needed something more. I needed to tie Celeste directly to the documents, to the fraud itself, in a way that was more visceral than a digital signature. I remembered the pen she used, a ridiculously expensive fountain pen she was fond of brandishing in meetings. I found the model online. It was a limited edition Mont Blanc, and one of its advertised features was its unique ink, infused with microscopic gold particles, creating a subtle pearlescent shimmer, a glitter. I ordered one, along with a pocket-sized UV light. With the pen in hand, another detail clicked into place. I went back to the file from my hallway camera. I isolated the frames where Celeste's hand was raised. Just before it struck my face, I zoomed in. The quality was remarkable. I could see the fine lines on her skin, the manicure, and the ring on her right hand. It was a custom piece, a band of gold with a single, large diamond, and under magnification, I saw it, a tiny, almost invisible fissure in the setting, a hairline crack running from the edge of the stone to the band, a unique, identifying flaw, an imperfection in her perfect facade. Sitting in the blue light of my monitor, surrounded by these disparate pieces of evidence, an envelope, An email fragment, a photograph, a pen, a cracked ring. I felt a cold certainty settle over me. I had asked myself the question before. In a world of powerful men and corporate lawyers, who would believe a single slap? The answer was now clear. No one had to believe the slap on its own. They wouldn't have to take my word for anything. The slap was just the catalyst. The proof would be in the details. The proof was a chain of custody, a trail of evidence that started with a violent act in a hallway and ended with a series of glittering, inky fingerprints on a set of crooked books. They would believe the ink. That night, I sent a single, encrypted message to 3 recipients. The message contained only one word: initiate. Within the hour, 3 replies came back, each one identical. Ready. My ghosts were in position. The theater was set. The annual North Alder Ventures Board Gala was a masterclass in corporate self-congratulation. It was held at the Vesperine Hotel, a place of soaring marble arches and hushed, expensive silences. The theme for this year's event, displayed in elegant silver script on placards throughout the ballroom, was "No drama, only impact." The irony was so thick it was practically a toxin in the air, a poison I had spent months developing an antidote for. Tonight, I was here to administer the first dose. I wore a dress the color of the deep sea, a fluid, dark green silk that shifted to blue under the light of the crystal chandeliers. It was simple, elegant, and designed to be underestimated. Over it, I wore a tailored black coat, a concession not to the temperature of the room, but to the necessity of concealment. Tucked into an inner pocket, cool against my skin, was a digital audio recorder no larger or thicker than a credit card. It was already on. The ballroom was a glittering ecosystem of power. Men in exquisitely tailored tuxedos and women in jewel-toned gowns drifted in shimmering schools, their laughter light and meaningless as bubbles in champagne. I moved through them, a solitary predator in a vibrant coral reef, my eyes scanning, cataloging, assessing. I saw my father, Daniel, standing near the bar, looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen him. A glass of whiskey held in a hand that was not quite steady. Celeste was at his side, radiant, a queen in her court. She wore a diamond necklace that glittered with cold fire, a perfect match for the ice in her veins. They were holding court with a state senator. I avoided them, my trajectory calculated and precise. My target was a man standing alone, observing the room with the detached air of a biologist studying a foreign species. Harlan Pierce. He was NAV's new chief legal officer, hired 6 months ago with a great deal of fanfare about his impeccable record and his background as a federal prosecutor. He was the one piece on the board that didn't fit Victor and Celeste's game. He was, by all accounts, exactly what he appeared to be: clean. He had been hired to be a symbol of the company's integrity, a handsome piece of window dressing. They had fatally miscalculated. They thought his integrity was a decoration. I knew it was a weapon waiting to be aimed. "Mr. Pierce," I said, my voice pitched to cut cleanly through the ambient chatter. He turned. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. "Ms. Hale, I didn't expect to see you tonight." The theme was too compelling to resist, I replied, a small, dry smile on my lips. "No drama." A flicker of understanding, or perhaps just amusement, crossed his face. "Indeed, in my experience, the louder a company talks about having no drama, the more it has to hide." He took a sip of his club soda. "Are you enjoying the impact?" "I'm waiting for it," I said. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 observers on the edge of the glittering spectacle. We were the only 2 sober people in the room. The lights dimmed. A spotlight found Victor Lyle on the stage, looking every bit the visionary CEO. He tapped the microphone, and a pleasant chime silenced the crowd. "Welcome, friends, partners, visionaries," he began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. "Tonight, we celebrate impact, the impact we make on the world, on our communities, on the future." He launched into a soaring speech about NAV's commitment to corporate responsibility. My hand went to the phone in my evening bag. I had already synced it to the ballroom's AV system through a backdoor Knox had found in their network. My thumb hovered over the screen. Not yet. And no one, Victor continued, his voice swelling with emotion, embodies that commitment more than the chairwoman of our primary philanthropic partner, the Cedar Outreach Foundation, my dear friend, and our company's ethical compass, Celeste Hale. Applause, bright and brittle as breaking glass, filled the room as Celeste swept onto the stage. She looked magnificent, a benevolent angel of charity. She spoke of recent floods in a rural county, of families who had lost everything. It was a moving performance. Then, the large screen behind her flickered to life. "We at Cedar Outreach believe in direct impact," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured empathy. "We were on the ground within hours." A video began to play. Sad music swelled. It showed heartbreaking images of flood damage, of families huddled in shelters, of small children with tear-streaked, smudged faces. It was emotionally manipulative and brutally effective. But my eyes were on the bottom right of the screen. The Cedar Outreach logo, a stylized cedar tree, was there, but it was fuzzy, strangely distorted, as if it had been poorly superimposed over the footage. It was a fake, a cheap digital forgery, the logo of a company that existed only on paper. As Celeste's speech reached its crescendo, Victor joined her on stage. He held up a champagne flute. "To impact," he declared, "to Cedar Outreach." The entire room raised their glasses as the word impact left Victor's lips. My thumb pressed the screen of my phone. I sent a single, encrypted hyperlink to a single recipient, Harlan Pierce. The text of the message was simple: due diligence. Harlan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down. At the exact same moment, one of the secondary screens flanking the stage, a monitor meant to be showing a live feed of the cheering crowd, flickered. For precisely 1.5 seconds, the faces of the board members were replaced by something else. It wasn't a video of children. It was a clean, cold, black and white image of a bank ledger. A single line item was visible, showing a transfer of $2.5 million from North Alder Ventures to Cedar Outreach, and next to it, a corresponding outflow from Cedar Outreach to an anonymous offshore account, minus a 10% commission. A perfect, undeniable round trip. Then it was gone, replaced by the smiling face of our CFO. A collective murmur went through the crowd. A young technician standing by the AV booth went pale, frantically tapping at his laptop. On stage, Victor Lyle's smile froze. He blinked, his brain trying to process the anomaly. He recovered quickly, letting out a forced, hearty laugh. "Whoops, a little technical glitch there. Folks," he boomed. "Someone's spreadsheet just tried to crash the party. Let's get that fixed." But the damage was done. The image had been burned onto the retinas of everyone in the room. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at Celeste. Her hand flew to her neck, a classic gesture of anxiety. Her fingers toyed with her diamond necklace, and under the glare of the stage lights, the flawed ring on her right hand caught the light. The tiny hairline crack I had seen in the video stills was there, a visible imperfection. She was rattled. I leaned towards Harlan Pierce, my voice a bare whisper against his ear. "Drama enough for you?" He didn't turn his head. His eyes were still fixed on the stage, but his focus was sharp, analytical. He was no longer a spectator. He was a prosecutor. "Keep going," he murmured back, his voice a low, steady hum. The game had begun. As if on cue, a hired event photographer, sensing the disruption, began circling the stage, his flash firing in rapid succession. One of the flashes caught Celeste as she lowered her hand from her neck, her wrist turning into the light. For a fraction of a second, the intense burst of the strobe illuminated her skin, and I saw it. A faint, almost invisible shimmer on the side of her hand, near her thumb, the minuscule gold particles in the ink of her signature pen, reflecting the light. It was there. The stain of the ink was on her. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my water. I hadn't attacked. I hadn't made an accusation or presented a single piece of hard evidence to the room. I had simply turned on a light in a dark room for a fraction of a second. I had shown them a glimpse of the monster they were pretending wasn't there. Tonight wasn't about the kill. It was about the hunt. It was about introducing a new, unquantifiable variable into their carefully managed world: fear. I wanted them to go home tonight, to their perfectly decorated houses and their empty lives, and to feel the cold, metallic taste of it in the back of their throats. I wanted them to wonder what I knew, who I had told, and when the next light would switch on, the drama was just beginning. The manufactured applause inside the ballroom was a brittle, hollow sound that didn't quite reach the cold air of the Vesperines terrace. I had retreated there after the glitch, letting the chill wind on the 30th floor clear my head. The city of West Barrow sprawled below, a vast, glittering circuit board of indifferent lights. The party continued behind the thick glass doors, the music a muffled, frantic heartbeat. They would be talking, whispering, speculating. The first tremor had been sent through the foundation. I heard the slide of the glass door behind me. I didn't need to turn. I knew the sound of his shoes on the flagstones, the hesitant, shuffling gait of a man walking towards a verdict he already knew. Rowan. My father's voice was thin, stripped of its usual bluster. I turned to face him. In the dim light filtering from the ballroom, his face was a mask of gray dread. The jovial COO, the man who commanded meetings and signed off on 9-figure deals, was gone. In his place was just a scared, old man. "You have to stop this," he said. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. "Whatever this is, whatever game you're playing, you have to stop it now." I said nothing. I just watched him. My silence a vacuum he felt compelled to fill. That thing on the screen, the numbers, people are talking. Pierce is asking questions. He took a step closer, his hands held up in a gesture of supplication. "You will kill my career. Rowan, everything I've worked for, my retirement, my reputation, it will all be gone." The words hung in the cold air between us. My career, my reputation. The selfishness of it was so pure, so absolute, it was almost admirable. He saw the fire starting to lick at the edges of his world, and his only concern was for his own comfort. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply reached into my evening bag and took out my phone. I navigated to the secure folder, my thumb moving with practiced, steady precision. I selected the file, hallway 0003.move. I held it out to him. "This is what you're worried about, Dad? Your reputation?" The small screen lit up his face. The audio was tinny but brutally clear in the quiet of the terrace. My own voice, saying his name, then Celeste's, the silken threat, and then the sharp, ugly crack of the slap, the sound of the glass shattering, his own choked, useless gasp. He flinched as if he'd been struck himself. The phone in my hand felt heavy, a small, dense brick of his failure. He shoved his hands in his pockets, the same gesture of concealment I'd seen in the hallway. He couldn't look at me. He stared out at the city lights, his jaw working. "Celeste, she has a temper," he mumbled, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "She lost control. It was a mistake." The excuse was so weak, so pathetic. It was an insult. I lowered the phone, the video still looping in silent, damning repetition. "Dad," my voice was quiet, but it was sharp as a shard of glass. I waited until he finally, reluctantly, met my eyes. Did she lose control, or did she take control using violence? There's a difference. He had no answer. The question was a scalpel, and it had sliced right through his carefully constructed denial. He looked away again, defeated. But I wasn't finished. The personal failure was established. Now for the professional one. I swiped the video away, pulling up another file. The clean, crisp interface of my mirrored ledger, the ghost of the company's books. I scrolled to a specific section, A series of outgoing transfers from the Cedar Outreach account that didn't go to an offshore entity. They went to a domestic holding company, a small, private investment fund. I angled the screen towards him. Do you recognize this account name? He squinted, and then I saw the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. The account was named Lighthouse Holdings. When my mother was alive, when we used to go sailing as a family on Greywater Lake, he was always the lighthouse. That was his nickname for himself. The steady beacon, the one who guided the family safely to shore. It was his private vanity, his personal piece of heroic fiction, and he had used it to sign his confession. He let out a long, ragged breath that turned to smoke in the cold air. I thought I was protecting the company, he whispered, his voice cracking. Victor said it was a liquidity strategy, a way to keep cash reserves off the main books, to keep them fluid for acquisitions. He said it was standard practice in funds of our size. Standard practice, I repeated, the words flat and dead. Is that what he called it? Did he also tell you that Lighthouse Holdings was being used to pay for Celeste's interior decorator for the house in the mountains? Or the lease on his new sports car? He sagged against the terrace railing, the strength gone from his legs. He was a man drowning. The lies he'd been told, and the lies he'd told himself finally filling his lungs. I didn't know, he said, but there was no conviction in it. He knew. He had chosen not to know. I put the phone away. The time for presenting evidence was over. It was time for a decision. I need 2 things from you, I said, my tone shifting from interrogation to instruction. First, I need a signed, voluntary statement affirming that you will cooperate fully with any internal or regulatory investigation. The statement will confirm that you acted on the direction of the CEO, but that you are now prepared to provide all relevant information in your possession. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Rowan, a statement like that is your only way out of a prison sentence, I finished for him, my voice devoid of emotion. It turns you from a co-conspirator into a cooperating witness. It's the best deal you are ever going to get. I took out my phone again and opened a secure note-taking app. The statement was already written. I had drafted it that afternoon. I held it out to him. You can sign with your finger. He hesitated for a long moment, his life spooling out in front of him, the quiet retirement, the golf club membership, the respect of his peers, all of it turning to smoke. Then, with a shaking hand, he took the phone and scrawled a jagged, barely legible signature at the bottom of the text. His digital John Hancock on the death warrant of his own career. He handed the phone back to me as if it were radioactive. He looked a decade older than he had 10 minutes ago. No drama, he whispered, the words a hollow echo of his old mantra. It wasn't a command anymore. It was a prayer, a desperate, hopeless prayer. What's the second thing? He asked, his voice a rustle of dry leaves. The off-site records safe, the one at the archival facility. I need the password. He looked at me, a flicker of his old stubbornness in his eyes, but it died just as quickly. He recited a string of 16 alphanumeric characters, his voice a monotone. I typed them into the note, saved it, and encrypted the file. The transaction was complete. I had what I needed. For the first time in a long time, I felt a pang of something other than cold anger. It was a deep, aching pity. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. He was stiff at first. Then he slumped against me, a dead weight. It was the first time we had hugged like this since my mother's funeral. The same scent of cedar and fear clung to him. I'm going to make a lot of noise, Dad, I murmured against his shoulder. But I'm going to do it by the book, legally. He gave a small, shuddering nod. When I stepped back, I glanced towards the ballroom, and I saw her, Celeste. She was standing just inside the glass door, a champagne flute in her hand, watching us. She wasn't frowning. She wasn't panicking. She was smiling, a slow, knowing, predatory smile that was slightly askew. It was a smile that said she knew there had been a confrontation, and she was confident she had already won. She was wrong. She thought the fight was about him, about this broken man on the balcony. She thought it was about family. She still didn't understand. I knew, in that moment, with the cold wind on my face and the weight of my father's confession on my phone, that the final battle wouldn't be fought here, in the shadows of a family's collapse. It wouldn't be won in a hallway. It would be won in the one place I was stronger than her, the one place where my rules applied, the boardroom. The gala was Sunday, on Monday morning. The atmosphere at North Alder Ventures was thick with a nervous, electric hum. The story of the technical glitch had metastasized overnight into a dozen different rumors. I let them fester. My work began before the sun came up, with the first item on my checklist. Item 1. Establish the battlefield. At 7 o'clock a.m., I sent a calendar invitation from my official account. The subject line was intentionally bureaucratic and immediately alarming. Urgent. Emergency Board and Executive Committee meeting regarding philanthropic fund risk exposure. The body of the email was concise. In light of potential fiduciary and compliance irregularities identified during the preliminary Q3 review, an immediate risk assessment of the Cedar Outreach Foundation portfolio is required prior to the quarterly report filing. Your attendance is mandatory. I scheduled it for 9 o'clock a.m. the next day, Tuesday. In the 21st floor boardroom, the mandatory attendance list included the entire board, Victor, my father, and Harlan Pierce. The optional attendee list had a single name, Celeste Hale. Item 2. Secure the ammunition. At 7:30 a.m., I met Harlan Pierce in the sterile, soundproof document review room in the legal department. He looked like he hadn't slept. He had a stack of case law printouts on the table regarding corporate malfeasance. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. What do you have? Hale? I slid a plain black external drive across the table. Everything, I said. He provided me with a legal preservation authorization code, a long alphanumeric string that officially placed the drive's contents under a litigation hold. This meant any attempt to delete or alter the data from this point forward would be a federal crime. I plugged the drive into the quarantined legal server. One by one, I uploaded the folders. Knox's packet sniffer logs and the damning email fragment. Gabe's time-stamped photographs of Victor at the Cedar Outreach back door. His briefcase a dark, solid block of guilt. Maribel's meticulous logs of Celeste's late-night visits, cross-referenced with building security access records. My father's signed statement. The files transferred, each one a digital soldier falling into rank. The final folder was labeled Hallway 0003. That one, I told Harlan, is the motive. Item 3. Lure the target into the kill zone. At 8 o'clock a.m., I sent a separate, personal email to Celeste. The tone was the opposite of the first. It was fawning, respectful, almost sycophantic. Dear Celeste, it began. Given your invaluable leadership as chairwoman of the Cedar Outreach Foundation, your presence at tomorrow's risk assessment meeting would be an honor. Your insights will be critical to clarifying the Foundation's operational successes for the board. We have reserved a seat for you as our guest of honor. It was a velvet-lined trap. To refuse would be an admission that she couldn't defend her own foundation. To accept was to walk willingly onto my stage. She replied in under 5 minutes. Of course, happy to provide clarity. Item 4. Prepare the environment. That night, long after the offices were empty, I used my master keycard to access the 21st floor boardroom. The room was a glass box, with a panoramic view of the city I associated with my own isolation. I went to work. The main projector at the head of the table was for the primary presentation. I plugged in a small, innocuous-looking laptop and set the screensaver to a single, blank slide with a digital clock in the center. I set the clock to count down from 18 minutes. 18:12. Below it, in small, discrete letters, were the words, Agenda Item 1, Risk Review. 18 minutes was the average time it took for a hostile corporate takeover to be executed in a prepared boardroom. It was also the length of my audio recording from the gala. I then moved to the secondary projector, a smaller unit aimed at a side wall. I accessed its maintenance panel. Knox had given me the override codes. I tweaked the settings on the bulb's color temperature, pushing it far into the violet spectrum. I enabled a custom preset I'd designed, accessible with a single keystroke on the remote. The preset would kill the visible light and emit a narrowband frequency just on the edge of the UV spectrum. It would be my black light. Item 5. Chain of custody. Before leaving the boardroom, I took a deep breath and walked to the executive coat closet. I found the hook. The pinprick lens stared back at me. A silent, patient witness, with a small tool. I unscrewed it from the wall and pocketed it, the most critical piece of physical evidence. Back in my office, I extracted the micro SD card. I used 3 separate, brand-new card readers to create 3 identical, bit-for-bit clones of the drive's contents. Each clone was placed on a new, factory-sealed SD card. The next morning, at 8:30 a.m., I met Harlan again. I handed him one of the cards. He dropped it into a static-proof evidence bag, signed his name over the seal, and locked it in his personal office safe. The original and 1 copy remained with me. The final copy went into a secure deposit box at a bank 2 blocks away. Redundancy. Item 6. The technician. The AV technician assigned to the 21st floor was a kid named Leo, barely 22, eager to please. I called him to the boardroom at 8:45 a.m., under the pretense of testing my presentation. I showed him the main screen. "Leo, I want this countdown clock running as soon as I begin. Don't stop it for any reason." He nodded, eyes wide. "Now," I said, picking up the remote. "This is a special presentation. I will have verbal cues embedded in my speech. I need you to listen for them. When you hear the CEO say the word impact, I need you to switch the main projector's input to this HDMI feed." I pointed to a cable connected to my own encrypted tablet. "It's a data slide," I said, lying smoothly. "It will only be up for a few seconds, then switch back." He nodded again, concentrating. "And one more cue. If at any point you see our guest, Mrs. Hale, touch her hair like this." I mimicked a nervous gesture of pushing hair behind an ear. "I need you to hit the Presentation Mode 2 button on this remote for the secondary projector. Just for a moment." He looked at the button, then at me. "It's a special lighting effect," I explained. For emphasis, he bought it completely. He was a pawn, and he didn't even know the name of the game. Item 7. The cavalry. At 8:50 a.m., I stepped onto a small, private balcony and made a call. The number was for the Ashmore State Bureau of Charitable Integrity. I was transferred to a senior compliance officer. "Good morning," I said, my voice calm and professional. "My name is Rowan Hale, head of risk management at North Alder Ventures. I'm calling to schedule a provisional consultation. We are conducting an internal review of one of our philanthropic partners and have identified certain accounting anomalies that may rise to the level of requiring formal disclosure. I'd like to schedule a preliminary meeting with one of your agents, just to ensure we are proceeding by the book." I suggested 9:30 a.m. "If," I added, "our internal meeting confirms the necessity," the officer agreed. "Agent Miller would be on standby." I had officially put the state on the clock. Item 8. The family. At 8:55 a.m., I sent a single text message to my father. "Be on time. Sit by the door." It was a strategic command. His position by the door made him a flight risk, an observer, and a potential witness who could exit without disrupting the room. It also placed him as far from Victor and Celeste as possible. Item 9. The self. At 8:59 a.m., I stood outside the boardroom doors. I could hear the low murmur of the board members gathering inside. I looked at my reflection in the polished brass plaque on the wall. My face was pale, my eyes dark. My hands, holding my tablet, were perfectly still. I sent one final message, addressed to no one, a final command to the operator of this entire machine. The message read, "Don't shake." Then I pushed the door open and walked in. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the heavy oak doors of the boardroom clicked shut. The sound was unnervingly final. 21 floors above the city, We were sealed in a glass and steel box, a tribunal of our own making. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and unspoken anxiety. Victor sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, radiating a forced, confident smile. He looked presidential, to his right. Celeste sat in the chair reserved for the guest of honor. She was a vision of quiet luxury, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, her lips painted a precise, confident slash of crimson. My father sat near the door, as instructed, looking like a man attending his own execution. Harlan Pierce was on my left, his face a neutral mask, a blank legal pad and a single, perfectly sharpened pencil laid out before him. I stood at the lectern at the opposite end of the table. On the main screen behind me, the countdown clock began its silent, inexorable descent. 1759, 1758, 1757. "Thank you for attending," I began, my voice calm and even, amplified slightly by the room's sensitive microphone system. "This meeting has been called to address 3 areas of potential risk that require the board's immediate attention ahead of our quarterly report. These risks pertain to our primary philanthropic partnership with the Cedar Outreach Foundation." I clicked the remote. 3 bullet points appeared on the screen, written in stark, white text. Financial irregularities, potential for round-tripping funds, procedural breaches, irregularities in the external audit process, conflict of interest, overlap in executive oversight between entities. A low murmur rippled through the board members. Victor held up a hand, his smile unwavering. "Rowan, I appreciate your diligence, truly, but I think we can handle this offline. There's no need to alarm the board with technical accounting jargon." He turned his paternal gaze on the rest of the room. "North Alder has always operated on a foundation of trust. We are more than a company." He paused for effect, his eyes sweeping over me, my father, and finally landing on Celeste. "We are a family." That was the word. The cue. Family. An emotional appeal designed to shut down logical inquiry. But for me, it was a trigger. "The numbers don't operate on trust, Victor," I said, my voice cutting through his benevolent facade. "They operate on verification." I clicked the remote again. Leo, the young technician in the corner, performed his task flawlessly. The main screen instantly switched inputs. The 3 bullet points vanished, replaced by the clean, cold grid of my mirrored ledger. It showed a transaction summary, a series of 7-figure transfers from NAV to Cedar Outreach, and from Cedar Outreach, a corresponding series of transfers, always precisely 90% of the original amount, to a holding company. The name of the holding company was in the final column, clear as a verdict: Lighthouse Holdings. A sharp, ragged gasp cut through the silence. It was my father. He made a small, strangled sound, his hand flying to his chest. Every eye in the room swiveled to him, then back to the screen. The connection, the private, familial meaning of that name, was lost on them, but the data was not. Harlan Pierce's pencil, which had been poised over his notepad, began to move. He wrote with a steady, unhurried rhythm, his eyes never leaving the screen. He did not look shocked. He looked confirmed. Victor's smile finally faltered. A small muscle twitched in his jaw. This is a fabricated document, Rowan. This is a serious breach. You've brought falsified data into a board meeting." "Is it false, Celeste?" I asked, turning my gaze to her. "You signed the authorizations." She was a statue of perfect composure, but her fury was a palpable heat radiating from her side of the table. Slowly, deliberately, she stood up. It was a power move, meant to let her look down on me, to command the room's attention. "This is a slanderous accusation from a disgruntled family member," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I have dedicated my time, unpaid, to a noble cause, and I will not be insulted by a child playing with spreadsheets." She adjusted the cuff of her suit jacket, a small, dismissive gesture, a gesture of pushing something, or someone, away. It was the second cue. Leo hit the button. The main lights in the room dimmed slightly, and the secondary projector, aimed at the side wall, flickered on, but it didn't project an image. It projected a strange, violet-hued light that washed over the side of the room where Celeste was standing. She froze. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as her hand came to rest on the dark wood of the table, a collective gasp went through the room. On the side of her right hand and across her wrist, a constellation of tiny, glittering specks appeared, glowing with a faint, ethereal blue-white light under the UV beam. The pearlescent, metallic particles in the ink from her signature pen, a phantom signature, an invisible confession, made visible. It was exactly where a right-handed person's hand would rest as they signed a stack of documents. Before anyone could speak, before the shock could even register, I clicked the remote again. The UV light went out. The main screen changed once more. It was a still frame, a high-resolution image of my own face, turned to the side, my cheek red and already beginning to swell. And behind me, her arms still raised from the follow-through of the blow, was Celeste. The flawed diamond ring on her finger was perfectly in focus. Then I let the video play. The audio, captured by the pinprick microphone, filled the silent, horrified room. My father's weak, pleading voice. No drama. Then the slap. The sound was obscene in the sterile corporate environment, a raw, ugly crack of violence that made several board members physically recoil. It was followed by the crash of the wine glass, and finally, my father's damning silence. The 3-second clip ended, leaving the still image of the assault frozen on the screen. "Treason!" Victor roared, lurching to his feet. He pointed a trembling finger at the technician. "Leo, turn it off! Turn it all off now!" Leo, terrified, reached for his laptop, but Harlan Pierce was faster. He leaned over and pressed a single, unmarked button on the table's central control panel. A small red light blinked on. "The AV controls are now locked." "Victor," Harlan said, his voice calm and authoritative. "And for the record, this meeting is being officially recorded as per corporate bylaws for any meeting discussing potential litigation. Your outburst has been noted." Victor stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. The trap had sprung. He was no longer in control. I turned back to the board. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of every piece of evidence they had just seen. "I am not a disgruntled family member," I said. "I am your head of risk management, and I am reporting a catastrophic risk. The evidence I have compiled, including the full, unedited video of that assault, which establishes clear motive for my removal, along with the company's complete unaltered general ledger and the signed, cooperating testimony of the COO, has been secured and provided to our chief legal officer." I looked at each board member, one by one, letting the weight of my words settle. "Therefore, I formally recommend the immediate, temporary suspension of CEO Victor Lyle and Corporate Ethics Advisor Celeste Hale, pending a full investigation by an independent committee. I also recommend that the complete file be turned over to the State Bureau of Charitable Integrity for their review." My final word hung in the air. At that exact moment, a soft, polite chime echoed through the room. It was the chime from the digital clock on the presentation screen. 9:30 a.m. As if choreographed, the heavy boardroom doors swung silently open. A man and a woman in conservative business suits stood in the doorway. The man held up an ID. "Agent Miller, Bureau of Charitable Integrity," he said, his voice pleasant but firm. "I believe you were expecting us? We were told there might be an incident that required our attention." The arrival of the state agents sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. The air grew thin and cold. Board members who, moments before, had looked merely shocked, now looked terrified. This was no longer an internal corporate squabble. The seal had been broken, and the real world had just entered the room. Victor stood frozen, his face a mottled canvas of rage and panic. Celeste, however, was made of something colder. A slow, chillingly amused smile spread across her face, the crimson lipstick a vivid wound in her pale features. It was a look of pure, condescending triumph. She let out a soft, breathy laugh that was somehow louder than Victor's shouting had been. "Oh, Rowan," she said, her voice dripping with mock pity. She turned from me and addressed the room, specifically Agent Miller. "You'll have to forgive my stepdaughter. She has a flair for the dramatic, a truly impressive performance." Agent Miller's face remained impassive. "Ma'am, we're here to—" Celeste held up a perfectly manicured hand, cutting him off. "Yes, I know why you're here. She called you. She built this entire theater for you." She gestured to the screen, which still showed the frozen image of her hand striking my face. A slap, a family disagreement, regrettably made public, and a spreadsheet of numbers she doesn't understand. Her eyes found mine, glittering with malice. "She is a very good actress, but she made one critical mistake. She didn't read the fine print." She turned to Harlan Pierce. "Mr. Pierce, as the chief legal officer, you understand the importance of signatures, don't you? A signature is what makes a transaction legally binding." She then pointed a long, crimson-tipped finger at the screen showing my mirrored ledger, specifically at the line item for Lighthouse Holdings. "She claims that's the smoking gun, but she forgot to show you the actual, signed PDF of the wire transfer authorization. Perhaps you should pull it up, from the official company server. Of course, not her little fantasy spreadsheet." Harlan glanced at me, a question in his eyes. I gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. A current of unease rippled through the room. This was a move I hadn't prepared them for. This was her counterattack. With a few keystrokes on his own laptop, which was connected to the company's mainframe, Harlan located the file, the official, executed wire transfer authorization for the first Lighthouse Holdings payment. He projected it onto the main screen. There it was. The amount, the date, the routing numbers, and at the bottom, in the signature line, was a clean digital signature. It read, "Daniel Hale, COO." A collective, audible gasp went through the room. The entire board turned as one, their eyes locking onto my father, who was still standing by the door. He looked impossibly small, a man shrinking under the weight of 20 pairs of accusing eyes. Celeste's smile widened. It was a predator's smile. The authorization for that transfer, and every subsequent one, was signed by the Chief Operating Officer, your father, Rowan. She let the words hang in the air. "A public indictment. It seems your star witness is actually your primary suspect." The silence was absolute. It felt like a physical weight, pressing down, suffocating. My father stared at the floor. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "Daniel," one of the older board members asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, "is this true?" My father raised his head. His eyes were glassy, his face ashen. He looked at me, a silent apology in his gaze, an apology for the weakness that had brought us to this moment. Then he turned to the board. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence, it was as loud as a gunshot. I signed it. It was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment my entire case, built on a foundation of his cooperation, was supposed to crumble. I could feel the momentum in the room shift, the doubt creeping into the board members' faces, but I remained perfectly still. My heart was a cold, steady drum against my ribs. I had anticipated this. I had modeled this variable. "He did sign it," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the tension. The room turned back to me, surprised by my calm. "But that isn't the legally relevant question." I looked directly at Celeste, whose triumphant smile began to flicker with uncertainty. "The question is twofold. First, whose pen did he use to sign it?" I let the strange question hang in the air for a beat before continuing. "And second, Mr. Pierce, could you please examine the metadata of that original PDF file? The one from our server." Harlan, looking intrigued, typed another command. A new window popped up on the screen, a cascading wall of text and code showing the file's properties. It listed the creation date, the author, the software used. It was a digital fingerprint. Look for an authorization script field, I instructed. It might be listed under custom properties. Harlan's fingers flew across the keyboard. He scrolled down, his eyes scanning the lines of code, and then he stopped. He leaned closer to his screen. "Well, this is unusual," he murmured. He highlighted a single line of text. The font was small, but on the massive screen, it was undeniable. The text read, "Authentication Protocol, Celeste Auth v2." "Celeste Auth?" a board member asked. "What is that?" "It's a digital signature protocol," I explained, my voice cold and clinical. "One that, according to our IT department's software logs, was installed on exactly one company computer, the one in the office of our corporate ethics advisor." I turned to Harlan. "What else does the metadata say about that protocol, Mr. Pierce?" Harlan read from his screen, his voice grim. "It says the protocol utilizes a pre-signature script. The signature is captured once, then the script allows it to be applied to subsequent documents by a non-signatory user with administrative permissions. It's a digital stamp." The room erupted in whispers. The truth, technical and damning, settled over them. My father hadn't willingly signed every transfer. He had signed once, and Celeste had used a piece of custom software on her machine to forge his signature on every subsequent document. Celeste's face had gone white. The crimson lipstick was a grotesque smear of color. The trap had twisted, and the jaws were now closing on her. "That's a lie!" she shrieked, her carefully constructed composure shattering. She whirled around, her eyes wild, and pointed a trembling finger at Victor. "He did it! Victor made the tech department install it on my machine. It was his plan." Victor Lyle looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open, his face a picture of stunned betrayal. "Celeste, what in God's name are you talking about?" He looked from her to the board, his hands held up. "I have no idea what she's talking about. This is insane." The partnership had imploded, the final act of rats in a cage. "Actually, you both knew," I said calmly. I clicked my remote. 2 new images appeared on the screen, side by side. On the left was Gabe's grainy, nighttime photograph, Victor, leaving the back of the Cedar Outreach office, carrying the hard-sided briefcase. "This was taken last Thursday," I said, "on a night when, according to the ledger, a cash withdrawal, not a wire transfer, was made from the Foundation's account. A cash withdrawal authorized, digitally, by my father's forged signature." Then I pointed to the image on the right. It was a screenshot of the email fragment recovered by Knox. The email from Celeste to Victor. "And this," I said, "is the email you sent to Victor 2 weeks ago. The subject is Draft for Charity Gala Speech. But the line I want you to focus on is the one at the bottom." I zoomed in. The text was sharp, clear. "Let's finalize the round-trip details tonight." And then, the killing blow. A sentence that had been in a subsequent fragment Knox had recovered only 2 days ago. "Have tested the pre-sign protocol. It works perfectly. We'll bring the pastries." The room was silent, utterly, completely silent. The UV light on her hand was the appetizer. The metadata was the main course, and this email was the poison in the wine. Agent Miller finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying the immense weight of the law. "Mr. Lyle, Mrs. Hale, I'm going to have to ask you to turn over your company and personal electronic devices, now." My father, who had been watching this entire exchange with a look of dawning comprehension, finally straightened up. He looked at the board, his voice stronger now, clearer. "I take full responsibility for my failure of oversight as COO," he said. "I was negligent. I was a fool. But I was not the architect of this plan. I signed one document that I was told was a standard cash flow maneuver. I did not authorize the rest." I stepped forward. "Mr. Pierce," I said, "I ask that the minutes of this meeting officially reflect that Daniel Hale has cooperated fully, has provided a sworn statement prior to this meeting, and formally requests to be treated as a cooperating witness in any and all subsequent investigations." Victor slammed his hand down on the mahogany table. The sound was like a gunshot, but it was an act of pure, impotent fury. He was finished. And Celeste? Celeste took a single, involuntary step backward. For the first time since I had met her, the smile was gone, completely gone. All that was left was the stark, raw architecture of fear. The chaos that followed Agent Miller's entrance was quiet, which was somehow more terrifying than shouting would have been. It was the quiet of a machine grinding to a halt, of a system collapsing under its own weight. Victor and Celeste were frozen statues in a tableau of their own ruin. The board members looked at each other, their faces pale with the shared realization that the ground beneath their feet had just given way. It was Harlan Pierce who broke the spell. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate, commanding the room's attention not with volume, but with an aura of absolute legal authority. He was no longer the company's lawyer. He was the court's arbiter. His gaze swept over the board, ignoring Victor and Celeste as if they were already ghosts. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice a calm, steady anchor in the swirling panic. "In light of the evidence presented, and the clear and present legal and financial risk to this company and its shareholders, I am formally making a motion. It is a 3-part motion, and I request we vote on it immediately." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The tapping of his pen against his legal pad was the only sound in the room, a steady, rhythmic beat, like a slow, anxious heart. Tap, tap, tap. "First," he continued, "I move for the immediate suspension, with pay, of CEO Victor Lyle, pending the outcome of a full and independent investigation into the matters discussed today. All access to company property, servers, and accounts is to be revoked, effective immediately." Tap, tap. "Second, I move that Celeste Hale, in her capacity as a non-employee advisor, be permanently barred from this building and all other North Alder Ventures properties, and that all advisory relationships be terminated, effective immediately." Tap, tap. "And third, I move for the formation of a special investigative committee, comprised of 3 non-executive board members, to oversee the independent investigation. This committee will be granted full authority and resources. I recommend that Rowan Hale be retained as an independent risk coordination consultant to this committee, to ensure the continuity and integrity of the evidence she has compiled." The motion was a clean, 3-bladed guillotine. It was precise, brutal, and left no room for ambiguity. The chairman, a man named Marcus Thorne, who had looked moments from a heart attack, seemed to find his footing in the solid ground of Harlan's legal process. "A motion has been made," Thorne said, his voice raspy. "Is there a second?" A quiet, "I second the motion," came from a woman at the far end of the table. "We will proceed to a vote," Thorne declared. "Given the circumstances, we will use a paper ballot." A junior legal associate, who had been hovering by the door looking terrified, was dispatched to collect slips of paper. The silence in the room returned, thick and suffocating, broken only by the scratch of 7 pens on paper. Victor stared at the table, his face a thunderous mask of disbelief. He scribbled his dissent with a furious slash of ink. Celeste, having no official standing, no vote, could only sit and watch, a spectator at her own immolation. The ballots were collected and handed to the chairman. He unfolded them one by one. The room held its breath. "The motion to suspend Mr. Lyle, bar Mrs. Hale, and form the special committee," he paused, clearing his throat, "passes. The vote is 6 in favor, 1 opposed." The verdict was delivered. It was done. Victor Lyle's reign was over. Agent Miller and his partner stepped forward. "We'll need those devices now," Miller said, his voice polite but unyielding. One by one, laptops were closed, phones were placed on the table, the tools of their empire, now pieces of evidence. As the agents worked, Harlan caught my eye and gave a slight nod. I walked over to Agent Miller and handed him a small, encrypted flash drive. "Agent," I said quietly, "there is a file on this drive. It contains the names and contact information for 3 individuals who provided information relevant to this case. They are not employees and acted as confidential informants. I have been assured by our chief legal officer that they will be afforded full whistleblower protection under state law. Miller took the drive without a word and slipped it into an evidence bag. Their anonymity will be protected. Ms. Hale, thank you. Knox, Maribel, and Gabe were safe. My ghosts could return to the shadows. And then, it was time for the final act. I walked over to where Celeste was sitting. She was staring at her hands, which were clasped tightly on the table in front of her. She looked up as I approached, her eyes empty of their usual fire. The crimson lipstick was slightly smeared at the corner of her mouth, the only sign of her inner chaos. "The board has requested that I escort you from the building," I said. My voice was neutral, the voice of an employee carrying out a directive. She said nothing. She rose from her chair, her movements stiff, robotic. We walked out of the boardroom together, leaving the wreckage behind us. We walked down the long, silent corridor of the 21st floor, the same corridor where, just 2 nights before, she had assaulted me. The lighting was the same cool, sterile white. The air was just as still, but the power dynamic had been inverted with the force of a tectonic shift. I was no longer the victim returning to a hostile home. I was the agent of the verdict, and this was her final walk. We reached the spot by the console table, the place where her wineglass had shattered. She stopped, her gaze drawn to the floor, as if she could still see the ghost of the broken glass. She turned to me, her voice a dry, rasping whisper. "No drama." The words were a pathetic echo of my father's warning, a desperate, hollow plea. She wasn't commanding me anymore. She was begging. I looked at her, my face as impassive as I could make it. "It's just the minutes now. Celeste," I said. "It's all just part of the official record." I had taken the emotional, violent core of her world and turned it into a line item in a corporate report. It was the cruelest thing I could have possibly said. The elevator doors at the end of the hall chimed, opening with a soft whoosh. As she turned towards them, her reflection appeared in the polished steel doors. It was the face of a stranger. Her hair was slightly disheveled. The confident, crimson smile was gone, leaving her lips pale and thin. The diamonds around her neck looked like a heavy, glittering chain. She was no longer Mrs. Hale, the queen of the manor. She was just a woman in a navy blue suit, reflected in the cold, unforgiving surface of a consequence she had engineered. I looked past her, down the hall. My father was standing there, leaning against the far wall, just as I had left him on the terrace. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched us, his face a landscape of regret. As my eyes met his, he gave a single, slow nod. It wasn't a nod of forgiveness. It wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It was a nod of acceptance, a final, painful acknowledgement of the truth he had tried so hard to avoid. I walked Celeste the final few feet to the main security desk in the elevator lobby. The guard on duty looked up, his expression carefully neutral. I took the guest pass that had been issued to Celeste from her unresisting hand. I placed it on the marble countertop. "Revoke all access for Celeste Hale," I said, my voice clear and final. "Effective immediately." From another corridor, I saw Victor Lyle being escorted by 2 uniformed security guards. They were leading him towards the service elevator, the path of disgrace. He didn't look at us. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. A fallen king being led from his castle through the servants' entrance. An empire built in 2 years, dismantled in 18 minutes. The countdown clock in the boardroom would have just hit 0. I stepped back as Celeste entered the elevator alone. Her shoulders were slumped. She did not look back. The polished steel doors slid shut, her reflection dissolving into a thin vertical line and then vanishing completely. The bell chimed softly, announcing its descent, the end of their era. The boardroom emptied out slowly, like a theater after a tragedy. The board members filed out in a state of shell shock, murmuring to each other in hushed tones, avoiding my eyes. Agent Miller and his partner took formal, quiet statements from Harlan and the chairman before leaving with their haul of electronics. the digital ghosts of a fallen kingdom. Soon, the only people left were me, Harlan, and the lingering scent of fear. The room was a wreck of abandoned coffee cups and hastily scribbled notes. I walked to the lectern, the silence a stark contrast to the explosive tension that had filled the space just minutes before. My movements were methodical, automatic, a checklist being completed. I powered down the secondary projector, plunging the room into its normal, flat, corporate light. The UV effect was gone. The magic trick was over. I ejected the small memory card from the laptop I had used for the countdown clock, the audio file of the gala now just a useless piece of data. I slid it into my pocket. Then, I walked to the head of the table and, using Harlan's pen, signed the temporary minutes he had drafted. Motion passed. Suspension effective immediately. My signature was a clean, steady stroke. The final nail. Back in my office on the 34th floor, the city spread out below. Indifferent. I sat at my desk, the place where I had spent countless hours mapping out this very outcome. I opened my email client and composed a new message, addressed to the chairman and the board. The subject line was, resignation. The body was short and professional. To avoid any and all perceived conflicts of interest during the forthcoming investigation, I hereby tender my resignation from the position of Head of Risk Management, effective immediately. As per the board's motion, I accept the temporary 30-day role as an independent consultant to the special committee. I look forward to ensuring a smooth and transparent transition. I hit send. It wasn't a retreat. It was a repositioning. I was no longer an employee, bound by their rules. I was an outside contractor, an expert witness. I had more power now than I'd ever had before. Next, I opened my encrypted messaging app. I sent the same 3-word message to 3 separate contacts. Paid, safe, thank you. I received no replies. None were needed. The transaction was complete. My ghosts, the janitor, the barista, the driver, could melt back into the city's anonymous circulation, their lives untouched, their bank accounts a little heavier. The network was dissolved. The door to my office opened softly. It was my father. He looked like a stranger in this space, a man from a different world, a different lifetime. He stood there for a long moment, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. "They're letting me go home," he said, his voice a hollow shell. "Under the terms of the cooperation agreement, I have to stay in the state." He looked at me, his eyes pleading, searching for a foundation in the rubble of his life. "You can come home tonight, Rowan. Celeste's things. They'll be gone. It can be like it was. Like it was." The words were a fantasy, a desperate attempt to rewind a clock that had been smashed to pieces. The past he wanted to return to had never really existed, and the house he was offering was not a home. It was a crime scene. It was a monument to his weakness. I looked at this man, my father, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty space. The anger had burned away, leaving behind only the cold, hard ash of the truth. "Which home, Dad?" I asked. My voice was not cruel. It was just empty, a simple, honest question with no answer. He had none to give. He just stared at me, the final, dawning comprehension of what he had truly lost settling into his face. I picked up my coat and my bag and walked past him, out of the office that was no longer mine. I didn't take the elevator. I took the stairs down to the 21st floor. I needed to walk that corridor one last time. It was empty now, the polished floor reflecting the overhead lights. I walked to the spot outside the boardroom, where the ornate, gold-leafed mirror hung. I stopped and looked at the wall beside it. There was a tiny, almost invisible screw hole in the wallpaper, a small, dark puncture. In the sterile light of the hallway, it seemed to sparkle, a tiny, dark star, a single, silent musical note left over from an ugly symphony. I reached out and touched the spot with my fingertips. The drama doesn't end when the shouting starts. It ends when you have gathered enough evidence to finally be silent. When the facts speak so loudly, you no longer have to. I continued down to the ground floor. The main lobby was bright with the clinical light of midday. The sun streamed in through the massive, floor-to-ceiling windows. I walked towards the main entrance, my heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the marble. I paused at the spot where I had knelt to wipe my own blood from the floor. The spot was clean now, polished to a perfect, seamless shine. As I stood there, the sunlight cast my shadow long and dark across the white stone. It fell exactly where the stain had been. The blood was gone, but I was still here. The evidence had been erased, but the consequence remained. I pulled out my phone one last time. I composed a new email, addressed to Agent Miller at the Bureau of Charitable Integrity. I attached a single file from my secure cloud. The original, pristine, 3-second video. Hallway Gur 03 move. I looked at the file name, then I carefully deleted it and typed a new one. No drama. I hit send. The file, the final, perfect piece of irony, was gone, delivered to the hands of the state. The case was closed. The massive revolving glass door spun before me, a slow, silent vortex. I stepped in, and the hushed, air-conditioned world of North Alder Ventures fell away behind me. The door spun once more, pushing me out into the noise and the wind and the brilliant, chaotic light of the city. I stepped onto the pavement, and I didn't look back. Thank you so much for listening to the story. I'd love to know your thoughts. So please comment below and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support this work and help it reach more people, hit that hype button. It helps more than you know. Thank you again for being here.